and continuing today with all that Jesus achieved for us on the cross, the exchanges that he offers us because of his work on the cross, his sacrifice. And he took our poverty so that we might have his abundance. Poverty for abundance. That's the exchange we're looking at today. As usual in our studies, let's look at the scriptures. First of all, the New Testament scriptures, 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty might be rich. Let's say 2 Corinthians 8 verse 9. Now you don't have to be a theologian to realise what's the bad thing here. Poverty is the bad thing, and what's the good thing? Riches. So this is the exchange. Let's have a look at it the other way round. In 2 Corinthians 9 verse 8, we see it said differently the other way around. God is able to make all grace abound towards us, so that we, always having all sufficiency of things, may abound in every good work. So the first verse talks about him being poor so that we can become rich, and then what does that grace do for us? Having all sufficiency in all things to abound to every good work. Now, you can't find any part of life that's not covered by that promise. It's all things. God is able to make all grace abound to us. That's not some grace, but all grace, that we always. That's the kind of level of God's complete provision for his people that he made possible by the substitutionary sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. He was made poor that we might have his abundance. So let's look at this. I believe it's God's will for every Christian to have his needs supplied and enough left over to give to others, because it's more blessed to give than to receive. God doesn't want any of his children to be at the lower level of blessing. Some people picture Jesus as some kind of a travelling preacher wandering around in rags looking for handouts. This is not how it was, certainly not. He was clothed like a normal man apart from what distinguished him, which was a very elegant, seamless robe, which he wore on top of the other clothes. This robe was so valuable that the soldiers at the cross would not divide it. They cast lots. Jesus didn't need to carry a lot of cash. He just used his Father's credit. And he was always honoured. I mean, any man who can feed 5,000 men, plus women and children in the wilderness, and leave them completely satisfied, is certainly not poor. What about the time when the question arose about the tax money? He didn't send Peter to the bank, he sent him to the Sea of Galilee, and the money came in the mouth of a fish. And at the Last Supper to his disciples, he said, when I sent you out without staff or purse or any provision, did you lack anything? This is in Luke 22:35. And what did they answer? Nothing. We lack nothing. Now, many ministers today are equipped with cars and houses, but they still lack a lot of things, but not those first early apostles. Why? Because they were supplied out of God's abundance. Let's look at the Old Testament now, the chapter on blessings and curses, which is Deuteronomy 28. It's a long chapter, 68 verses. The first 14 verses are blessings, and the remaining 54 verses are curses. If you've ever been in doubt what a curse is, just read those 54 verses and you'll find what curses are. And you may find that as a Christian you've been enduring curses, not realising that was a curse. I want you to notice two particular verses in particular. Verses 47 and 48. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28. Because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness of heart for the abundance of things, therefore you shall serve your enemies, whom the Lord will send against you in hunger, thirst, nakedness, and in need of all things. Now take those four statements: hunger, thirst, nakedness, and need of all things. What would you call that in one word? I call that poverty, absolute poverty. You can't have a greater poverty than being hungry, thirsty, naked, and in need of all things. Now, being hungry, naked, and in need of all things, thirsty, describes exactly how Jesus was on the cross. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten in 24 hours. He was thirsty. One of his last statements on the cross was, I thirst. That's in John chapter 19 and verse 29. He was naked. I know most of the depictions of Jesus on the cross put a nice little cloth around him, but he was naked on the cross, and they stripped him of all his clothes, and he was in need of everything. He didn't have a single thing to his name. Now, when the time came for him to be buried, he didn't even have a tomb to go to. He was buried in a borrowed tomb, and a borrowed robe in a borrowed tomb, borrowed cloth to wrap him up in. He didn't have a grave cloth. They wrapped him up in a borrowed or a made cloth for him. He didn't have one of his own, and in a borrowed tomb. That's in John 19, verse 38. Jesus totally exhausted. He took every aspect of poverty upon himself and totally exhausted the poverty curse. Why? So that we might have what? Abundance. That's right. That we might have abundance. Do you see the exchange? Poverty for abundance. So say this exchange with me. Jesus endured our poverty that we might share his abundance. That's today's wonderful exchange that Jesus accomplished for us. I'll see you again next time.